Call the meeting to order.
Wow, what a ceremonial act. Our first Finance Committee meeting of 2023 is hereby called to order. Let's go.
And first up on our agenda is Kevin Smith, the partner with Crow, and he's going to go ahead and talk about our annual audit for 2022. And I can go ahead and share your presentation, Kevin. Let me pull that one up now.
And Harry, I know you've heard our discussions before, but I always like to try to remind the audit committees and the finance committees that we may work directly with management, but we work for you. So although we have some prepared remarks, answering your questions related to our planning of the engagement is absolutely the most important thing we could accomplish today. So if you have any questions at the end, or for that matter, at any point, please tell me to be quiet and ask the questions, and Michelle and I will get you your answers. So if you'll slide to slide 2, Ashley. Our agenda today was some brief introductions, although that will be very consistent with the people you have dealt with in the past. Present our audit plan as well as the required communications under both the AICPA and government auditing standards. Make a few inquiries of you guys as it relates to fraud or potentials for fraud. Those are some expanded questions, but really it's just kind of picking away at the same questions that we've always asked. And then some a set aside time for questions, but again, please feel free to enter or to ask at any point. So slide 3 and 4 with you today is myself. My name is Kevin Smith. I have been a partner with Crow for almost 15 years. Served in public accounting for over 30. All of my clients are those that receive federal aid. So focus on financial statements, but really as well as the compliance aspect of auditing federal and state awards. With me today is Michelle Buss, my senior manager on this engagement. She's been with Crow almost the same 15 years and had spent some time with Deloitte as well. Again, specializes 100% in what we deem to be the public sector or those receiving federal aid. Next slide. Our engagement team is very consistent with previous years. However, but we do rotate people in and out because we believe that provides a fresh perspective, allows people to ask or when questions are answered versus just thinking, oh, that's the same as last year, so it must be right. Really, delving to understand what is happening, particularly as it relates to controls, questions as it relates to substantive analytics, et cetera. So you will see new team members. But we think that it's kind of the best of both worlds, having that consistent leadership team that understands the organization as well as its risk, and supplementing it with changes in younger professionals. Probably the most important aspect of this, again, Harry, is we work directly for you. You have our phone numbers, our emails. If you have any questions, concerns between now and issuance, please feel free to reach out. Next slide. Next again. So this is the timeline for our delivery of service, and very consistent with previous years, meets all required filing deadlines of WFS, and we believe very achievable. It will continue to be a mixture of on-site as well as some remote. We really try to understand what our clients expect from working through their schedules. So we've learned over the last 3 or 4 years, we don't have to be on site 5 days a week. And we also aren't going to say, but we like to be on site Monday through Wednesday. Oh, but that doesn't align with when staffing are there. So we'll really work through what works best for both Crow as well as management. Probably the most important aspect, we spend a lot of time testing internal controls, both financial reporting as well as single audit. One of the unique things of WFS, and quite honestly, for many local governments or not-for-profits, you have the audit of the financial statements, and then you have the compliance audit. And the compliance audit is almost a byproduct of the financial statement audit. it really turns itself on the head with you guys. And I believe the most significant risk, the most significant challenge of the audit is really focusing on those compliance audits, whether it be federal or state. And then the financial statements almost fall out of that, because 99% of what you do is federal and state grant related. So we spend a tremendous amount of time understanding the grant process, new grants, the impact there, and kind of unique to grant management. I have to assume that you have controls. And that forces us to test those internal controls to determine both that they were designed properly and that they operate effectively, versus just gaining an understanding and moving on. We do a lot of that during that May and June timeframe. So that will really allow us to kind of understand early on whether we have any control deficiencies, et cetera. Late June, we'll be delivering drafts of the financial statements and then meeting with you in July again to deliver those results. The one thing I will say, we believe in somewhat of a no surprises audit. I'm never going to surprise Laurie with material findings at the end if I knew about them in May and June. And by the same token, if I knew of something overly significant, I wouldn't be waiting, Harry, to reach out to you and to discuss that prior to those meetings. Next slide. So very quickly, and these are consistent with previous years, and I won't go bullet by bullet, but we have to meet certain requirements in order to reach our audit opinion. Due to the receipt of federal and state grants, we perform our audit under two separate auditing standards, both those promulgated by the AICPA, as well as those promulgated by the government auditing standards. We're going to obtain reasonable, not absolute assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. That's the goal, and an unmodified opinion is the highest level of assurance. Really doesn't alleviate management of their responsibility for the preparation of the financial statements, nor does it alleviate this committee of their responsibility for proper oversight of management. But again, we will be designing our audit underneath those auditing standards to reach that reasonable assurance. We here, the second to the last bullet, an audit of the financial statements includes consideration of internal control as a basis for designing audit procedures that are appropriate, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion upon the effectiveness. So not like Sarbanes-Oxley, we won't be opining upon the internal control structure. But again, this is kind of that difference that I was alluding to with the single audit versus the financial statement audit. I have to test the controls as it relates to compliance over allowable expenditures, cash management, all of those requirements that the federal government puts down. I have to test the internal controls there. We would use a letter that we call a report on internal control over financial reporting, and we would communicate any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, if noted, to you through that means. Historically, we have not had those material weaknesses and significant deficiencies, but auditors really have to say that each year stands upon itself, and we can't say, well, it's always been good, so it must be good. We will be taking a risk-based approach and subjecting the internal controls applied in the current year, as well as the transactions on a standalone basis focused on FY22. Next slide. A couple of key points here. We do use a couple concepts that are important to note. Materiality within the financial statements. That's both a quantitative and a qualitative measure. Here again, you guys are somewhat unique in that if I think about determining a quantitative materiality for a $180 million revenue organization, I'm going to have materiality that is relatively high. However, recognizing that the true risk that lies within workforce is kind of the idea of disallowed costs and how would those be paid back. Minimal fund balance as designed, because you spend what you take in, that really drives both my quantitative and qualitative materiality down. So our transactions are really focused on not the idea that you're in a $180 million organization, but you're an organization that receives federal funds with limited other outside sources. So how would you fund those disallowed costs? What that means is we do more procedures on you than a like organization that may have $180 million in just, commercial customer revenues. But we do have that concept of materiality. We also have a concept of sampling. Otherwise, Michelle and I would have a team of staff just as large as Ashley's staff, and they'd be sitting on bar stools behind their office desk chair watching every transaction be posted. But through the combination of that materiality, sampling, and understanding the internal controls, we believe we've designed our procedures that are sufficient in nature that will allow us to render our opinion. If we identify anything that makes us believe that fraud could exist, we will follow a kind of an established chain of command. If I believed that fraud existed out at one of the centers, I'd be talking to Ashley and Laurie, and obviously Harry, you'd be pulled in. But if I believed that it was somebody who signed my representation letter, the chief financial officer, the CEO, et cetera, my very first call is going to be to you, Harry. It's not going to be to them, et cetera, if I truly believe fraud exists. So say all that to say you would be made aware of that. We're not aware of any fraud as of right now, nor do we anticipate it, but we design our procedures to question what could cause material misstatement, whether it be error or fraud. Next slide.
If I could, just for a minute, Kevin.
Yes.
You mentioned how do we pay back that activity? And this is more for the committee. We have crime policy, directors and officers liability. We do not have an errors and omissions policy. The federal government does not allow us to use our money to pay for an errors and omissions. It would be so expensive in this culture. It would be ridiculous. We then look to our contractors. In Equus's case, they are well insured and self-insured. They recently were acquired by an Australian company. That occurred at the end of the year. So they generally are good for it. The most we've ever gotten back is on a monitoring visit for $3,000 or $100, depending on the error that was found. Usually it's ineligibility of a client. If we had a large sum to pay back from Child Care Group, that would be a different matter. They are nonprofit, kind of weak on the payback, but I know Tori, she'd raise the money if she had to. They also, both of those agencies have to carry the crime policy, their liabilities, anything that might come up. If not, we have to go into what is limited private cash in our books. But if all of that failed, this would go back to the county judge and the county commissioners. That is something that I have avoided for my 34 years here, and I would like to keep avoiding. When I took the program in 91 from the county, they made me a department head and said, here, you take this and go make it part of your nonprofit. They were about 100. Now, remember, this is in 90, 89, 90, 91. They were about 117,000 in the hole on a miscalculation of benefits to their employees, which is why they wanted to give the program away. So we settled that up. The state allowed us to use administrative money. Remember, we always carry this large administrative cash. If no fraud was committed, they would allow us to take that cash, perhaps, and convert it into paying for the wrong activity if it was not willful fraud. Strangely enough, I was attending a 1-hour fraud class last night and a cyber class on their behalf. The state requires all of us to do that annually and get a certificate and take a test and the whole thing. So that just kind of, I hope that's helpful, Harry, but it sort of lays out the pecking order in this. It's possible that the city could be included because of the appointment process, but I think that's doubtful because the CEO, the chief elected official, is the county judge. And that's one reason why Connie and I will appear before the commissioners in a week to present our 2-year plan. All of the facts and figures that come about, who we're going to train and what kind of programs, very pro forma, but they're used to seeing us every 2 years. So there's a little ownership there. Questions? Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. I think that color and perspective really helps. So SAS 99 or Statement on Auditing Standards 99 really came out a result of Enron. And basically the profession took a step back and said, perhaps part of the reason you didn't find fraud was you never asked whether there was fraud. So these are inquiries that we make of the the Finance and Audit Committee, but we also make it with the C-level suite, as well as those touching transactions, and then just a few random people as well. So with that, it's something that we ask every year. It's not something that we believe. We know something that means you're going to answer in the affirmative this year, et cetera. It's really just to make sure that we are all on the same page. And we really view kind of fraud as being able to occur most when these three things exist. Management or employees have incentive or feel pressure to commit fraud. That can be from a financial statement perspective, a compliance with grants, or it could be them embezzling or stealing money for themselves. So where does that incentive or pressure come from? Probably where we spend a lot of focus and attention is that the opportunity exists through controls being absent, weak, or overridden. You know, oftentimes with clients, we will make a control recommendation and people will view that as us saying that the person shouldn't be doing something, et cetera. But really, we think of internal controls as protecting honest people. So that safeguarding of assets, dual authorization, et cetera, we spend an awful lot of time there understanding the design and the operating effectiveness of those internal controls. And then just kind of an overarching rationalization due to attitudes or pressures. Just as an FYI, from an auditing perspective, we think that number 3 has somewhat increased over the course of COVID time, et cetera. So that's something that we pay particular attention to. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we've spent a significant amount of time thinking about, as it relates to number 2, did internal controls change when we went remote and then when we become hybrid and a variety of things? So what has actually happened within the internal controls and the documentation of those? So those are kind of the 3 lenses or the fraud triangle that we look at. And we then have our own brainstorming session and come up with how we think fraud could be committed, and we test to that. But with that, we actually ask you guys some questions as well. And if you'll go to the next slide. And I hate quizzing, and Harry, if you say this is not something I want to do in an open meeting, can you book a call with me tomorrow, etc. Happy to do that. Different clients do it in different ways, but these are the questions that we have to ask. And some of them are high level, kind of not theoretical, but tone at the top, such as what are your views about risk of fraud at the entity? And then just kind of progress down to specific, what do you know? But we can go through this now, or we can do it later. And I'm going to defer to you, Harry, for some guidance as to how you want to handle.
Yeah, we do it now. I'll tell you, Kevin, this is what I do a lot of in my day job is investigations into corruption and fraud. And I think you've got it right, exactly right on the framework from your discipline and from your background and where you come from. For me, investigations, I actually just look for time and space on fraud. I always assume it's an incentive. I think, show me a human and I've got incentive because of greed, and because they may have pressures that we don't know about outside of work. But I would also add on top of that, an idea that I want to probably push throughout this whole year is when people are loyal to people instead of principle, we've got an enhanced risk of fraud. And how that plays out is if an organization is too beholden, or it is too dominated by one person or a group of people, it's harder to find fraud because they cover for each other and because people are scared to blow a whistle, to tell us things, and they are always thinking more about, does this protect the king or the queen instead of the entity? So those are my philosophical views, but I'm happy to talk about this. This is the kind of thing I want to talk about. And it is our number one existential risk, even if it's unlikely to happen on a sort of daily basis. When it does happen, it's the end of all of us. So for me, I'm looking for time and space, in which people can operate. And I'm looking for undue loyalty to persons instead of principles. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
So we'll just dive in then. And in some respect, I think you've answered but let's take it kind of from a I think the way you answered that, or it wasn't framed to you as that's what you were answering, that was more based upon your past experiences, et cetera, globally. So let's take it to your kind of knowledge of the organization through your role as either treasurer, which I know it's your first meeting, but you've been a board member in the past, and we have former treasurers on the phone as well that I would deem to be audit, that is part of the audit committee. So what are your views about risk of fraud here?
Yeah, so I'm still new in knowing the people and how it operates, but I would say the conditions, I mean, we have to be careful. I think the risk of fraud are real because you have a sizable budget. You have, I would say, a pretty lean staff, and you don't have a lot of redundancies or contingencies built into the process. So it could be that someone could take a large control of the process. And if that happens, I think you always have to look at the very things you outlined. You know, you want to have dual authorizations. You want to have things split up. You want to have checks and balances all throughout the framework. So I would say the risk is real. Can't speak to the fraud prevention techniques we have or the training we have because I don't know those yet. I think training is going to be direct training that is not delivered through leadership necessarily, but from outside is going to be critical because sometimes people just don't know what to do and they don't recognize the signs of fraud.
If I could add, Kevin, remember we're governmental. It does make things different. So every person on our staff, every person in the field, every person who touches technology has to do a state training and quiz on fraud. And it's very much the triangle, very much here are the fraud hotlines, whistleblower assurances. The second is on cybercrime and getting snookered. We've got some experience in that. But let me tell you where the fraud has occurred in the past. This one was ridiculous because I couldn't believe what transpired. And it leads to a mantra that I have now. We had a company, I think it was AAC or ACA. They were on 75, South 75, the older buildings, and they took over for Lockheed Martin in privatization of public works. So they took our workforce center contracts in 05 or 04, 05. They did really well. And one day I get a phone call from the Department of Labor. They have gone down to the Department of Labor on Griffin, didn't even stop at my door, and thrown themselves on their sword. They settled up for several $1 million, never acknowledged it to us, and the federal government closed their books. I think it was the status of that contractor. What transpired was a young lady that we knew well could not accept failure. And she would have been failing if she hadn't falsified 8 TANF records to say that those people had been served properly. There was no backup on that. There was no way you would have said, oh, I'm going to call those 8 and find out if they really were, because there were thousands on the rolls. She pushed 8 people forward, and then she got a very guilty conscience and told her boss, this is what I've done, because I wanted the award. I wanted us to make the profit. And so the state squared it up. They gave the program, they just took them away and then came back to us and said, here, you just can't use them anymore. So we pre-procured. We got a ringer that time as well, but no fraud. What it proved to me was never set the performance bar as a pass or fail to the point that you have stressed the staff out so dramatically at the contractor level. I mean, think about TANF is half the profit for Equus. It's about $300,000 if they do what they did last year. So now what happens is every detail is checked, but also we're dealing with hundreds of people, not thousands of people. The TANF roles have declined dramatically, but it was a very interesting experience for us in terms of what created and no money was misspent per se, but the entire program was discounted and the feds took all the money back. I think it was a very nice gesture on behalf of the company. They didn't take us to court and claim they did it right, because it would have been hard to prove. But the young lady's testimony was ironclad. She had lied, or falsified the records. Then she got really upset about it, and that's what led to It could have been millions of dollars had the feds found it or we had found it, but I don't think we would have. That's just a case in point.
Item B, what are your views about the tone at the top regarding fraudulent activities? So again, this is kind of more a touchy-feely, in my opinion, although incredibly important, but difficult to put your thumb down and say, well, because we have A, B, and C, you know, I think the risk of fraud is relatively low. This is more about the reporting provided to the Finance and Audit Committee, provided to the Oversight Board, your interactions with top management. You know, I would say, based upon, and again, this is where auditors are always skeptical, based upon Laurie's words just then, very much focused upon it. I now have to, as an auditor, always want to see the proof and the substance behind those words. But, you know, she didn't just raise the flag and say, you know, we're about results and nothing else. So with that said, kind of what are your views about the tone at the top? I think you're on mute, Harry.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it's a bit broad, and as you say, Kevin, it's a little bit squishy. I would say that it's not so much about what people say from the top, it's how the rank and file hear it and how they understand it. That's what dictates tone, you know. It's your listeners who tell you what your tone's about. So I don't know what that is. I would say that obviously on paper, I'm sure, and in platitudes, we're all against fraud and we're doing everything we can. I would just say this: there's a danger anytime an organization has a lot of money and the control of it is housed in a very few people or one or two people, because it's very difficult for people to raise a voice and say what they want to say about things that bother them. Their future is too dependent on how they're seen by the top. And so I'd want to know more about that, about how welcome we are to people raising concerns. That's how we really stop fraud. That's how corruption gets stopped, is people much earlier in the process saying something's bothering them. And I want them to feel empowered, comfortable, non-retaliated against if they have issues. And I'm sure that our CFO would love that too, because, you know, she does her job better when she can find things before they happen. So that's what I'm interested in. You know, when I talk about training, it's more about that, is an attitude and a tone about there's no bad questions. You don't get in trouble for saying we should do something better. And we want better ideas. So that's what I'll look for. Right now, I would say the tone's great. I have no reason to say it's not.
Okay. We'll get out of a little of the nebulous. Do you have any knowledge of any fraud, alleged fraud, or suspected fraud affecting the entity?
Nope.
Are you aware of any significant unusual transactions that the entity has entered into this year?
Nope.
Do you believe that this committee has the oversight activities with regard to those risks, and that you guys can establish items that would be embraced to mitigate risk?
Definitely, yes.
Are you aware of any tips or complaints regarding the entity's financial reporting, whether it be through whistleblower program or anything directly reported to the Finance and Audit Committee?
No.
As it relates to audited financial statements, as well as, for lack of better words, I think Ashley's going to present the budget report, and I know you receive monthly and quarterly financial statements. Any concerns that you have ever had related to the authenticity of what has been provided to you?
No, none.
This one, again, always asked, but very important to you guys when I think about the grant compliance. Are you aware of any violations or possible violations of laws or regulations?
No.
This one, it's probably a little more commercial in nature. You do have related parties, whether it be the city of Dallas or the county. By definition, I don't believe that the people who you have a vendor relationship with the subs that administer the programs, but you always worry about, you know, transactions that are outside the normal course, any concern as it relates to any related parties, the substance of the transactions, the relationships, etc.?
No, not at this time.
If I could, Kevin, there is one. I'm not going to go into detail because we are taping this. We did have a vendor, and his business partner alleged fraud. So the letter came through, went to the state. They investigate fraud. We do not. And we are into the biggest mess I've ever seen. Not us, but what is going on at these career schools. It's back to the old days. During COVID, a lot of career schools came through. They got licensed by the state and did not. The state finally divulged to me they didn't do background checks on the owners of this school. So you have people with records, and the people lied on their transcript. You know, they lied certifying they did not have a background issue. And when we went to interview, or they went to interview the gentleman who filed the complaint, he was in jail. So we had this whole big thing going on. I think we've settled up. There was an attorney letter, but it wasn't to us. It was to the state. They were going to sue the state for their reputation and whatever. I think we trained a total of 13 people, or attempted to. Several moved on to other schools, and we withheld the payment for those. But I think Equus has issued a final check there. But this is the kind of thing that does come up, and hasn't in a long time because of COVID. But I think I've warned the state. They've let too many people in the program, too many vendors that were not properly vetted. So I think they're going to strengthen their vetting process as a result of this. And Carter, I worked very closely with Courtney on this, explaining to her if the state had an Achilles heel, I think it is the rush to push these training providers forward without proper vetting. I think y'all have all heard the career school stuff. It makes front page very often. But yeah, we had one this year and we're settling up with them now. I think they're going to be very difficult to deal with if the state doesn't take action. There was severe information in the reports that they've issued. I've shared those with John Dickey, and we're in pretty good shape. The 13 people, and I think the maximum was 8,000 a person. But you know, that's a waste. It's just sadness and waste, and we don't participate in that. So I've been telling the state they need better controls so that the boards can have better control. And they have given me back some controls about this that we thought they had taken over. I think they're nervous because they're not close enough to the ground to see these problems. That's just real world. And we can take that off our list, Michelle. I've already answered that one. Thanks, guys.
Any other matters related to risk of material misstatement as it relates to the financial statements, or non-compliance as it relates to federal grants that we haven't addressed that you guys would like to bring forward?
No.
Next slide. Any questions, whether it be audit process, timing, continuing the discussion, just how else can we, answer your questions and help you fulfill your oversight responsibilities as it relates to the audit process?
Kevin, what year are you on? Is Crow on in your audit contract?
I'm going to shoot from the cuff, Harry, and if I'm wrong, we will let you know, but I'm going to say we are in year 8. It would have been, I believe, 1 5-year contract, rebid, 1 the second time, and I believe we're in year 3 of that 5, but I could be off by a year or so.
And what's your thought on that continuing past this cycle? I mean, is it best practices to keep going like that, 5, or do you think it's better to have a cycle out?
So Harry, I'll just be brutally honest, but then I'm going to tell you what I truly think. I can argue both sides, because when you're a client, I can argue why it's so important to stay consistent. And when you're a target, I can tell you all kinds of reasons why rotation is good. With that said, this was, and I hate going back in time, but this, when post Enron, with the establishment of Sarbanes-Oxley, that seemed to be one of the easiest fixes for the PCOB, was to require auditor rotation. They did extensive analysis and really determined that most significant frauds occurred somewhere between year 1 and year 3 of rotations. They came back and absolutely said, we do not see that this solves any issues if you're being served by your current auditor. They then put a lot of responsibility upon the audit committees to have oversight over the auditors and to understand the audit process versus just leaving it within the hands of management. I do think it's best practice. As much as I would love to stop it, I do believe it's best practice every 5 years, whether it's just from a sheer economics, as well as seeing what other skill set, what other technology other firms have developed. I believe that if you guys are exercising your appropriate authority, I better go compete with my competition here in 2 years. I do not believe it to be best case to just start having an annual engagement letter and you guys just decide at some point to let me go or keep me for the next 50 years. I don't think that's right, particularly from a governmental entity with so many fiduciary responsibilities. So I think what you're doing right now is the right answer with 5-year rotations, but do I believe I am best suited to serve you guys and protect you from your risk because of my knowledge? I do, and I would hope that that came through in a proposal, but that would then be your decision and evaluation.
Have you and your team put in place different things year on year? I mean, do you try to find a different way to go about this? Or is the value in that year on year, you're doing, the same benchmark, if that makes sense?
It's really, Harry, it's a combination of both. I think I think probably back to what the PCOB discovered that most errors really occurred in years 1 through 3 is the sheer fact that the auditors didn't know the organization, didn't know where risk really could be. So I think that consistency is important, but fresh eyes and fresh perspectives are as well. I'd love to tell you that my staff person and senior who do 70% of the work were the same people for the last 8 years, but it's public accounting. We, as a profession, have about a 20% attrition rate naturally. So we have a variety of young professionals serving you guys, and they're the ones asking the questions, documenting the controls, testing the controls, and Michelle or myself would be reviewing. So I think we provide fresh eyes on a consistent basis on the lower end. On the higher end, what we do is we assign a second partner to review my work, my conclusions, as well as the reports, and they don't stay from year to year. It would be a new partner almost on every given year. Challenges my conclusions. There are certain documents that I'm required to complete and sign off, and it's really about the judgment areas, whether they're financial statements or single audits. That second partner is going to review that in depth and make sure that they concur. We don't issue without that occurring. So it's really kind of that fine line of taking advantage of knowing the organization, but having fresh perspective as well.
What are examples of findings that you think you're going to have to make that you would contact me first instead of president or CFO?
So the SAS 99 questions that we just went through with you, as I said, we're going to do that with the C-suite, and then all people who have an influence upon transactions, reconciliations, as well as programmatic people. They're more on a random basis versus 100%. We ask specific questions. Have you ever been asked to record a transaction that didn't make sense or had zero support? And if Jane Doe said, yeah, I have, I didn't understand why Laurie asked me to book this, but it did, and now it's yada, 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 then Harry, I'm picking up the phone and, well, one, I'm going to ask for support for the transactions, understanding it better, but the first person I reach out to is going to be you, not Laurie, because I don't want to necessarily just get her plausible explanation. She's a smart lady. She could probably tell me why it made sense, but I have now had somebody in the organization tell me this didn't. I felt pressure. I did A, B, and C. Do I anticipate that occurring? No, but that is one of the ways that I would say I have to have direct access to you.
Gotcha.
If Ashley said, I'm not, you found this audit difference, but if it books it, our net assets go to zero. And we really believe that the Texas Workforce or the Workforce Commission are going to have exceptions with this and bring all kinds of scrutiny. Now I've got issues because I think I'm committing fraud within the financial statements. Now, because it was Ashley, I may go directly to Laurie, but I'm also going to tell Laurie as soon as we're done with this, I'm letting Harry know about it as well. So it's really about kind of chain of command and getting to the right level. And you set above Ashley, and if it involves them, I'm coming to you.
Fair enough. Last question was when I first came on the board, one of the first meetings I was in, you were giving the audit report, I think, and I asked you if there were any things that didn't rise to material findings, but they were a question, and you said a succession plan or the lack thereof, and that you'd re-ask that. I've never seen that, and I actually think it's pretty crucial as it relates to my very first point on this call about when any organization is too dominated by one person, by one group, it is obviously more susceptible to other pathologies. So I haven't seen that. Do you know what the process or the status of that is and when we can see it?
Harry, I don't. It's a, you're right. It does have an indirect impact upon tone at the top and potential controls, but we also, move beyond tone at the top and actually test the internal controls. Nowhere within the auditing standards or COSO elements would I ever write a material weakness or significant deficiency for succession planning. So it's not something that we've said was a material weakness.
Correct.
And therefore we need to see follow up on it. People who have sat in your chair, particularly when management, because each year when we present the audited financial statements, management leaves the room for a few minutes. And the board says, okay, or the audit committee says, is there anything else that you're not telling us because you feel dominated by management, et cetera. Whether it be in that session or in public session, I have said, and I think the world of your staff, although again, I would say each year has to stand upon itself. It is a very lean organization. You have some of the most qualified people nationwide, but I also know that based upon years of tenure, et cetera, that can't happen forever. So when a board position or a member has asked me concerns, I've said succession planning. It does have an indirect, as you say, from a fraud perspective, et cetera. But even more importantly, what I'm trying to figure out is, put it this way, Harry, if I win, if the proposal goes out 2 years from now and I win and I'm committed to doing your audit for the next 5 years, I really want to know who my client is. And management has an element of being my client. And without proper planning, succession planning, and moving forward, you could find yourself very similar to what Dallas County was trying to punt 30 years ago, an organization that doesn't work. The regulations, this is not an easy organization to administer. The federal regulations just make it completely difficult. And if you don't know what you're doing, it is difficult.
Correct.
It's said differently, and just to be candid with you, over the course of the last 12 months, there's probably been 10 workforce agencies that I've seen RFPs on, and I have not bid on them because new management background was A, B, or C versus directly relevant, et cetera. And I just believe there to be too much audit risk. So I say all that to say succession planning is incredibly important, but I don't know where you're at in the process or if a report has been provided, nor could I.
No, that's fine. I'll get that different channel. I want to know if you had it. That's fine.
No, I do not.
The question. All right. Thanks.
If I could just speak into this, there have been, we've had a year of discussion, over a year, probably, heated up last year, February, March. I've been asked for a succession plan since 91. There have been multiple succession plans. The comment, and I was in my 30s, maybe. The comment was, well, what if you're talking on that cell phone and you get wiped out on I-30? I mean, we've had every condition. It wasn't just that I'm this age. At this point, we have 2 drafts, but we also have a lot of opinions. And that leads me to, it's quite a prickly subject when you ask people what they think. And I've talked to the judge, I've talked to the chair, I've talked to the past chair, and the lawyer. So we've got John Dickey, and I think Carter and John have talked more recently. There has to be a plan, but it's not naming a successor per se. And I think that's where we run aground, is what is more important. I'm not going anywhere intentionally for the moment. This is my life. Sadly, this career has taken over my entire career, 45 years, May 8th. I love it for whatever reason, and I will go on, whether I work here or not, to probably teach or monitor or do whatever. And I am a monitor, by the way, by trade, monitoring procurement. So I'm sort of a pain. And most of the boards wouldn't want me as their monitor. What I have seen, though, is no one has a good succession plan. We have a dear friend who's part of the Central Texas Board. She has a PhD, and she did her PhD dissertation on succession planning in nonprofit and government sector and how unwieldy that is. I'll give you a good example. The Texas Workforce Commission had a massive incident when their executive director passed away 4 years ago, January. And he had named his successor. She had worked in his shadow for over 10 years, Reagan mimicking everything. And when it came down to it, the 3 commissioners didn't care what Larry had put in place. And they completely pivoted away what would have been a very practical and smart decision to take the next in line who had been trained. And they went to some guy, and he's working out fine at this point, but it was not a good transition for 4 years. So that is the problem in government and nonprofit. This board can do anything it wants to do, whether there's a plan or not a plan. And I think that is it's a chafing conversation. Is it about naming successor? Is it about setting in place a decision that precludes a new board from making a different decision? And I think you'd have the same thing in any government situation. Politics, the order of the day, the money in the pipeline, all has an impact on how that plan is read 2 years from now, a year from now even. So that's what I'm up against, Terry, is trying to please a lot of people in this with what is it we're looking for? Is it hiring, naming a deputy? Or is it simply having a plan of action if something should happen? And I'm going to assure you a couple of things. Ashley's amazing in her job. Demetria is amazing, but needs help. We need more staff in her department. She does a lot. She does the entire contracting, childcare, and adult ed. And Connie is the deputy in terms of the board. She is your secretary. She knows how to contact the board and what takes place. Finding someone who wants to do what I do full time, it's not going to be easy. We've replaced 2, and Carter's well aware. Phaedra took over the North Central Texas Board a year ago, September. She came out of Parks and Recreation in Tacoma. She's brilliant, which is the only thing that saves her. She's a Fulbright scholar. I've tutored her a lot to try to get her into the workforce vein, and then also changed out Gulf Coast. Now, Gulf Coast had been under this same leadership for over 40 years, and they hired a lawyer. Juliet is lovely, but oh my gosh, she's drowning. She's reading it all to try to get a handle on it. So that's kind of where we are. I'm viewed as a mentor, trying to help a lot of these newbies, and they're new and they're wonderful and they bring new perspective. And that's the other thing I keep saying. The way I've done this job is not the way this job has to be done. It can be a different person with different assets, but it has to fill the gaps between the team and the president to make sure this agency keeps going forward. That's just me, but that's history.
Yeah, go ahead. A few reflections. Number one, if you can send me the current drafts, and I want to know who these different people whose opinions are, because they may not all matter as much equally. Second, I don't think it's incumbent on someone to name their successor for succession plan to exist. I think that's where they're bogged down. And every single business I've ever represented that started as a mom and pop that grew into a $700 million dollar business. That was what messed up your succession planning, is they thought they had to find a replica of them. And my parents just retired from running a very large institution, and they tried to do that. And I said, you don't have to find someone who'll do it like you did, because you didn't do it like you did when you started. You know, none of us are indispensable as much as we'd like to think that. And if all of us get hit by a bus tomorrow, we'd actually still have a Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas. It would still function. It would be ragged. So we want to make sure that, you know, we don't have a plan that sounds like a wish. We want to have a plan that is realistic, that we could all pass away tomorrow. So I want to see what that looks like. That's where I come from, is, you know, disaster planning, worst case scenario planning, not how much you love the job, because I'm sure you do. But I think also we need to know what it looks like and how long that looks like. And I think there are roles you could play as you transition out that are incredibly valuable, that might even be more up your alley nowadays. And those things could pay homage to what you've done so far. And we owe you a big debt, but also think I know you well enough to know that you want this thing to be even better. And we're all running a relay. We're not running the whole distance. So those are my reflections. I do want to see the plan so far. Let's get on them and make them real.
Appreciate that, Harry. I'll get with John, Dickey, and Carter. And I know John has at least the second draft. I think the first was more me talking to the judge, and his perspective was very government, very much what they do at the county. There's just a pro forma script, but you go out and you hire the consulting group and you get the deputy in place. Doesn't want a whole lot of time in the handoff. When I came into the job, I called the board chair, and I told the board chair I wouldn't take the job unless there was a full audit of the agency, because I didn't want to assume the debris. I mean, the place was a mess in '89. And that day, the day that I agreed to be the deputy, the state of Texas came in and took over the books of the agency. That's how bad it was. No controls, no books, no recognition of what had gone on. We owed taxes, IRS problems, you name it. So I'm well aware of how bad it can be.
Yeah.
But I heartily agree. It takes a village on this, not one person's skills. I've kind of grown into the job. I didn't have these same skills when I came in, and I know where the skills are lacking. I know what the holes are. So I think we can do something, and you'll be comfortable. But I think there's a whole lot in the implementation that concerns me. So that's something we got to visit about. Thanks, Kevin. Sorry, that was good talk, though. Carter.
Yeah, Harry, I would just mention, thank you for bringing that up. I have had that conversation with Kevin as well on the previous two audits. So it is time that we move. I have seen the draft that Dickey has, and it's more of a contingency plan. It's more of the bus hitting or the tornado or all those events. But I think it's time to move forward with something different. So Harry, I would love to engage with you and Dickey and Lori on how we move that forward.
Hey Carter, let's go forward with somebody wins the Powerball versus getting hit.
Somebody wants to take a ruined mill in Tuscany and turn it into their home and have wine and food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All analogies I don't understand, but thank you.
Carter's a focused man.
I'm pretty sure the 18-wheeler on I-30 is still more likely than the lottery.
Today, for sure. Don't go out. So, Kevin, I'm done with my questions.
Harry, it is always, and this is one of the things that I've enjoyed serving you and past chairs. It is an engaged board. That is not always the case within governmental or not-for-profit. I think you understand the risk that you guys face and our role within that. And I welcomed this dialogue. Hopefully I've answered your questions. To the extent that I haven't, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so much for coming, Kevin and Michelle. It was good to see you.
You too. Now, if I can just find where my mouse went.
Bye.
I didn't take it.
See ya.
See you guys soon.
So, Ashley, you're up.
Yes, sir. Let's go over the fiscal year 2023 budget. Let me pull that up to share with you all. Let's see. How do I get out of this guy? Sorry. Let me just close out of Kevin's presentation here.
Good morning, Dan. Thanks for
Good
joining.
morning.
Hey, Dan, didn't see you sneak in there.
Oh, he's been here. He got on right after we talked. I just didn't want to break
Morning,
the flow.
everyone.
I'd like to make this bigger. Go. All right, is that big enough?
Can you make it even one step bigger?
Yes, I sure can. Sorry, my Zoom buttons are in my way, so
That's
I can't
perfect.
see what I'm doing here. All right, so time to discuss our FY 2023 operating budget. And the budget here begins on page 2. This might be kind of difficult to finagle with your Zoom screens, but let me see what I can do here. All right, on this page, we're showing you, I don't know if you can see my pop-up that just came up. Sorry, everything's hitting me. On this page, we're showing you the, are you seeing a blank screen? There we go. I'm all over the place. All right. This is the actual administrative and program expenditures from FY 2013 through FY 2021. Now, we haven't quite completed closing out our books for FY 2022. So here I'm showing you the FY 22 budget versus our new FY 2023 budget for your consideration this morning. As you are aware, most of our grants come with an administrative threshold or limitation, many of which are 10% of total grant expenditures. Historically, the board has included many of the administrative expenses allowable in the budget up to the total threshold of all grants. So you'll notice here that we've budgeted $6.9 million in administrative expenditures for fiscal year 23. However, as always, I have a caveat to share related to that number. As you know, we're very frugal with our administrative money, and we only budget by line item for those expenditures we actually believe we will spend. Then we combine some of that remaining amount available per the grant guidelines as an administrative contingency. So in the past, when we have not spent the entire administrative amount allowable per the grants, we've repurposed those budget lines to program and effectively pass the money to our customer through supportive services. So you can see for fiscal year 2021, we originally budgeted $5.8 million in administrative expenses, but actual expenses came in at $3.5 million. Actually, I'd like to go ahead and show you a picture. Carter had me add this in last year, a picture of our admin budget here with our pie chart. This is on the last page of your budget, and it's showing you where all of that admin budget goes. So of course, our people are our number one asset, and that's reflected in that the majority of the admin budget is allocated towards salaries and benefits. And at the very extreme level, the FY 23 grants would allow us to spend up to $9.4 million in administrative expenditures. Now we budget $6.9 million for the year, and that number includes a contingency line item of $2.1 million. In the past, we have not had to dig into that contingency number. So that's not included in this pie graph here. This is just all of the other line items aside from contingency. The contingency is $2.1 million. And just to give you a little clarity, the salary and benefits lines here are $2.9 million for FY 23.
Actually, why do we set it at 6.9 instead of
The
close
full
to
9?
Yeah.
We just don't picture any scenario where we would dig into all of that money, and it's better to go ahead and put as much into the program line up front as we can so that we can give that money in a contract to Equus and Child Care Group so they know they have it available and they can start working toward appropriating those funds for the year.
Who set that number, and how did you set that number? And is that something that the board should have input on?
You could. We set it at the board level. We base it on history. So each of the actual line items on this chart, we're really basing off of historical expenditures. Any upcoming items that we see. So if we'll build out our salary charts based on what people are making now, what are their projected increases for the year, what open positions do we have. So we look into all of history plus anything we see upcoming for the year, and then we typically keep around a $2 million contingency.
Yeah, so there are reasons we might want to chase talent, we might want to have certain kinds of training, we might want to have some internals working. So we have a lot of leeway there. I guess my point is, I think that does belong at a board level to set, because it seems philosophical. That's a big spread.
Let me give you the rest of the history.
Yeah, we could be doing things that we're not doing. Go ahead.
Gotcha.
We have not always had this kind of childcare money, Harry. So we're also basically conservative still, because that money is a flash in the pan.
Yeah, I get you.
It comes and it goes. So living to the maximum extent of these funds, we have never laid people off, and we have never, well, I say that we have early on. Dan has a question. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, just on the other end of the spectrum, the 2.1 million in contingency, I guess philosophically, you want your budget either to always come under or to be as close as possible to what your actuals are going to be. So why is the cushion? It seems like 2.1 versus what's the actual amount that you
6.9. So it's like a 30% contingency.
But the contingency is for board consideration. If the board wants to ask me anything in the coming year, we have money to fund that. And I usually make that very clear in the presentation. There is money to do what you might want to do. We can show you all of the vacancies. We know where some weaknesses are. We need some social media activity and someone in communications. I've done that for years and cannot continue. We need some help in contracts, as I mentioned, full-time HR. Those are all accounted for. I believe those vacancies are in there, right, Ash?
Yes.
All right. So the contingency really, Harry, is in lieu of telling the board, yeah, you figure out the budget. It's like, and you still have this much money. If you'd like us to put it into program, we can do that. If you'd like to tell us what activities we're lacking, you've got the money to do it. So that's sort of the compromise in this. This is the conservative budget that we know we need, but we're also showing you what you have that you could work with. So is that better?
Understood. I understand your answer. Yeah.
Harry, I would just comment that we've heard for many years, lean organization. And I would, again, I know we all have one voice as the board, but I think this board should really look at the organization and look at some of those areas that Laurie just mentioned in marketing and communication and HR. And I think we're vulnerable due to this lean staff, and however we go about doing that, I think we need a deep dive into looking both at board engagement and also the organization and what's missing that needs to be put in place. And if we have the money, for God's sake, let's do it.
I agree with that. I'm just saying I understand Laurie's answer, and I think that we need to be persistently looking for ways to get better and chase excellence. So I think that's actually happy news. We have stuff to work with. Let's see how we can do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions related to admin specifically before
I don't believe we've give Dan an answer. And Dan, I hear you. I think it's such an odd system. We're in a very unusual place to have this kind of discretionary money, if you want to call it that, where most of the boards in Texas operate within the full 10% and happy they have that. And across the nation, they complain about not having infrastructure money. So the big boards in Texas are really gifted right now in having this flexibility. And everybody has a different view of the elephant. In North Central, they spend $2 to $3 million on tech tools. We don't spend on that. In fact, those tools have gotten in the way of their performance on childcare. So there's certain leans, and I guess it's just so not like a district. It's not like we're fighting for coins. But the smaller boards are definitely in distress when it comes to fleshing this out. Many of the directors are also the planners, or also part-time CFOs. And so it's hard to compare it. So I just offer you that. I do believe in what you're saying. The budget should be a lot more concrete, but this is the concrete portion of the budget. And it has those vacancies in it, but it doesn't have all the tech tools you might come up with. It doesn't have all of the innovation you might want to come up with. So that's why we call it contingency and say you do have access to this money. We don't need it to be who we are today, or to give you those extra staff, but there might be something special you come up with that's still legal inside the framework. This can only be spent to administer this program inside the rules, all these eligibility issues. And there are five federal organizations that we have to answer to, as well as the Texas Workforce Commission. So I'm happy to thread the needle and come up with whatever you'd like us to do with that discretionary in terms of better, smarter, stronger, more tech, more talent. Finding talent right now is a pain, but we've been pretty successful, strangely, with LinkedIn. More so, Ashley's been very successful. She has found a lot of good people during the crisis.
Are we in the process of hiring anyone new right now?
Go ahead, Ash.
Yes. So our accounting manager, she has put in her notice. So I'm looking for a new accounting manager.
That's an excellent example of why we always chase talent, by the way, because people are chasing our talent. So it really always has to go on. We have to always be chasing it.
We hired this manager during COVID, and our work is intense. What we do is intensive. And I think the job was just a little much. So she has family concerns. She's moving out of the area or having to care for parents out of the area. We do have a candidate. Not sure if she will come aboard. But yes, good talent right now is in flux. And what we have to offer, we can't compete with the salaries. Because we are boxed in by the state schedule of salaries. And so we are fighting with the idea that we are flexible and we are a passion project. If you care about this community, no better place to put your efforts. And that matters to a certain age group now. So hopefully we will keep scoring some good results. On the HR side, and Carter will know from the last meeting with John Dickey, we don't have a full-time HR job. We have an HR job, and Barbara does it well, but Barbara is more on my side of the career line in terms of age. And something we thought would be process appropriate would be not a part-time, but a contractual situation where someone is available to us, or they come in 2 days a week or whatever. And Carter, I don't think we ever went any further with that, did we?
No. John just mentioned that to me in our last meeting a few weeks ago. So no. But I agree. I don't think what's your total staff?
30.
30. So
Evan, it could be as high as 35. Let me say budgeted for 35 or 36, but 30 right now. And we haven't been over that number in years.
Of course, Harry knows this. You only need one to have a problem, but
True.
but it's hard maybe to justify a full-time HR person for 30 people.
You don't really see it until you get to 50-ish.
Yeah.
And up till 50 they do a lot of hybrid, but there's often someone who does some of those functions. It may not be a full-time job, but it's super important.
And Barbara's done well for us. She acquired the job. We've had 1 or 2 professionals in my time here, especially when we were reworking the agency, absorbing the county staff, when we ran the centers ourselves. But I'm still looking for that special person that will not be a problem and would kind of hang with the agency for a while. So someone that's maybe newly outside of a new job, an old job that's got good skills, but also appropriate government skills. Because so much of this is driven by the public record, or everything is imposed on us from the state.
I'll
Sir?
just go ahead and insert that, my preference is to focus on communication. I think that's an area that is the weakest
Yes, sir.
from my perspective, and will get you the biggest bang is somewhere in the communication. And I hate to use marketing, but that's sort of what I'm thinking.
Outreach and board communication, and just making sure there's a lot of stuff that I engage in that probably would not be done by the incoming anybody. So there's a role there that's important, but it has to be in sync with the president. So that's another thing is people I like today may not suit who's there in 5 years. So we've got a little work to do on that. And because it is a small organization, communication relationships really matter. And we've worked our way through several of those situations. It's important. We're very tightly fit in that little suite. So you got to get along. No two ways. Other questions about the budget? I will tell you about audit. We pay more. I've asked, Carter keeps telling me, ask other boards, what are they doing? So I went through the audit conversation. Carter, we're paying more than most, but what I learned, we're 120,000 or so a year to Crow. But what I learned is that many of the boards are not doing a comprehensive audit. If they're inside the Council of Governments, the Council of Government is doing the audit, and they may or may not pick the appropriate programs at the workforce level. Workforce is just a department for them. It's not a standalone nonprofit. So we are doing a lot more in the audit than some of our colleagues. And I don't know how to explain that. I don't know how that works in audit. Ashley's nodding because she's aware.
Yeah. So workforce and childcare is an even smaller piece of their big picture. So it may be several years before any of the workforce or childcare programs are selected and tested.
And then the small boards have less money, so they hire like a local auditor for $50,000 and they call it a done deal. We're really unusual in the scheme of that. So I will go back and see. There's only a couple of others that are incorporated. Austin, Tamara's board. Go ahead, Carter.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm never a proponent of cutting professional services. You don't say we need a part-time engineer when you're building a building. You want to, so the amount of money, I don't, and you procure this. So I'm not questioning the cost of Crow. I think it's money well spent to know that we are meeting and being examined. So no comment there.
And for me, it's more about, I can't compare apples to pears. That was the problem. So Crow asked me, would I write a reference letter or something? I don't remember what came up. It never took place, but it was like getting business from another board. And most of the boards are not looking for the Cadillac we have. The same is true with our attorney. John Dickey is not cheap, but the last thing you want is to score your attorney by the price. The other two boards in the region use the same attorney, and I think he comes in at 60% of John's rate, probably. Says he knows a lot about this, but he's more of a government entity attorney. Carvin's a great guy, and he and I talk often. When it's procurement time, I try to get him involved with us. He does, if anything ever happened to John, Carvin's waiting in the wings and has experience in this area. I like to keep that door open. So there's a lot to be considered, but you're right. We do spend a lot more. I mean, when we say conservative, it is we buy the best if we can afford it, and it comes through in procurement. So those two are not our cheapest activities, Ash.
So is this the line item professional services? Is that what we're talking about now?
And that would be our monitors. And Juanita Forbes, who has been with us 20 plus years monitoring programs at the contract level, has just notified us last week that she doesn't wish to continue. She's retiring from her company. She's lost a couple of her hard workers who know this business. Simultaneously, our financial auditor, Christine Wynn, who is a CPA, who's amazing in this space, has said she would love to have an opportunity to bid on program services. It turns out it is exactly the year. I think Juanito's contract will be up in September. So we'll launch a new procurement. Both of those are seasoned, smart monitors for this business, and they keep us out of trouble with the state by monitoring Equus and Child Care Group and the community college, all of our contracts. But it's nice having the dual. I hope we don't have to sacrifice that. It's good to have two different companies talking about how they view a contractor. And a lot of times we'll get them in the same room to go over what does the money say, what does the program review say. So having that out of one person, I've still got reservations. But we do have to go through a procurement, and we're looking at who else is in the business that knows what they're doing. Other professional services, I can't think off the top. Who else is in there?
Our technology with QNet at the board level, because this is just administrative expenditures on the pie charts here.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All financial reviews are charged to admin. Program reviews, however, at the contractor level can be charged to program cost.
Yep. All right. We still have some to talk about with our programmatic expenditures. So let me take a few steps back here. We're on page 3 of your budget. Page 2 broke out administrative expenditures versus all program expenditures. So here on page 3, we have administrative expenditures at the top, and we're breaking out all of our program expenditures between our workforce center costs to run all of our centers, our rent at the centers, utilities, all that kind of stuff. And then our subrecipient costs, primarily Equus and Child Care Group. So here in the budget, we have almost $6 million for our centers, which I'll go into a little bit more detail momentarily. And then last year, we were asked to go ahead and add in Equus and Child Care Group's operational costs. For FY22, we had 11 million for Equus and 6.2 million for Child Care Group. Now in 2023, our original and current contracted amounts are $10.3 million for Equus, $6 million for Child Care Group. But I would say that throughout the year, we do expect to see Equus and Child Care Group request some additional funding in these lines as we release any of that admin contingency. Let's say they'll get more programmatic costs available, so they'll need more operational costs to run the additional program pieces.
Ashley, talk about Child Care Group is such a strange contract, and it's true throughout the state. The $6 million is their operating capital. They also get $3 million from us in quality expenditures where they are interfacing with the schools and the daycare centers. They also pass through $100 million to the vendors. So the contract is far larger than, and I went through this with the judge week before last. There'll be an announcement, I think, very shortly that the judge wants to form a committee, a council at his level on childcare. So we're going through and scrubbing how much is it costing here. There's going to be some work with DISD. There's going to be some work with the city, with United Way. Who's putting money into the childcare bucket in Dallas County? And a lot of foundations want to know because hopefully they want to put more money into the bucket in terms of paying for things we're not allowed to pay for with government money. So Head Start will also be in that conversation. So we're rallying around making it very clear what money is in, what money passes through, and what money is quality. You'll hear a lot more of that this year, I think, than last year was more about the numbers, but this year is more about the analysis of what's being spent on childcare and what would it take to make it right. Only reservation I have, and I voiced this to him, the child care problem today will not be the child care issue for Dallas, perhaps in even 5 years. We are seeing children not living near centers. Children and families, and Dan, you're seeing this at the district. There are certain schools that no longer have a child population as it was originally intended, or you built the school because there were enough kids to justify an elementary, and now it's a middle school. We are seeing centers with vacancies. We're seeing centers close. We have a Head Start center that doesn't have the kids in the neighborhood to attend that center. A lot of talk about building new centers and moving things about. It's a tough time to make these big plans, but we're going to be part of it. And Susan Hoff and the committee will stay focused. Dan, are y'all district-wise, you're having similar issues, I know, not like other districts that are announcing closings, but any way you're facing that or talking about it as a board as to how to project out?
Yeah, well, we do experience the population shift that you're talking about, and actually a population decline. It has I mean, there's so many different factors. Housing is a particularly big issue, and what you've seen on the Ross corridor over the last 5 or 6 years is that we've taken these elementary schools. There are about 5 of them within a 1.5 mile radius that were once exploding with growth, and now you could basically fit all of the kids into one elementary school. So what we've done with the other buildings is we've turned them into choice programs, and some really, very successful ones like Solar Prep that you may have heard of. So where we draw kids from around the district to come to a specialty school. But I do have some data that we used and looked at a board meeting on the demographic changes in Dallas, but so much of it has to do with the gentrification of different parts of the city, where we're different. We needed a lot of schools at one point, and now the old apartments are being knocked down, and newer, higher end apartments are being built with families that don't have kids. So it is a struggle to deal with population shift, but the lack of affordable housing is a real problem in Dallas that we're seeing, in so many different areas.
We have a lot of customers that come to us and say, my voucher is not acceptable. It's too little money. So the landlord's kicking me out because they can raise the rent twice what I'm paying. I mean, we have seen that now for the last 3 years. So it's very sad what's going on. It's hard to pinpoint. A lot of people electing not to have children, young couples. So we're going to have to do the best we can do. This is elective. We can't bus kids. We can't help parents get the kids there. So it is something to look at. We cannot build structures with this money. We cannot do anything like that. We can't go into business. We simply have to pay whomever is out there. And I totally respect what DISD has done by accepting so many 3- and 4-year-olds. I think Tori and I agreed this week that she will have a full-time person committed to moving our 3- and 4-year-olds off the wait list as we can send them into ISDs around the county. So that's going to it'll limit what we spend because we'll be moving them to the ISDs. But in fact, long-range planning, that's where it's going to go eventually under state law. So we're trying to guess at everything. It is a Rubik's Cube. Okay, sorry, Ash, but you bring up so many good things that bring up things we're dealing with. Understood, but I'm pushing us too far. It's 10:30 already.
No problem. I can get through center costs in our overall budget. So of course, this overall $183 million, that all comes from TWC. So I didn't make that number up. But let's talk about what we have control over with our center costs, the $6 million. So I'm going to go on to the next page where we break that out a little bit. So as you can see, the largest line item here is for rent. And so I have total center costs on this page, and then rent is broken down by center on the following page. So I won't read these 2 pages to you. I know you have access to this presentation, and it's in the calendar appointment that Lori sent. I would note, since rent's the largest, I'll go ahead and scroll to that page just to give you an overview of our centers, and I wanted to make sure you noticed that we highlighted here our Garland Workforce Center. This is not actually a lease, it's a state-owned building, so we're not paying any rent here right now, but currently we are expected to need to move out of this building by July 31st of this year. Are there
And
any?
we might double to triple our space.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to be a hit to the budget, but I can't see that our second largest city would not have its own workforce center. I think we're pushing the envelope right now. I've got 5 centers in Dallas and 3 centers in the burbs. And that's not good. We've got Irving, Grand Prairie, and Garland, and we closed Mesquite during COVID. Mesquite is faring pretty well because our center on Buckner is like 2 miles from Mesquite's city limits to the east. So they still have a center to have access. I've not had luck with JLL finding me a center or even buildings to consider. There's only one consideration. Garland is filling up, but that is a good indicator. We've got to find something in Garland pretty quickly to house our people and grow that center just a bit. Not huge, but just a bit. It's a very small center, 7,500 square feet. So not even doubling it would still put it equal to the ones that we have in Irving and Grand Prairie.
Any questions about center costs or our rent, our space?
The only question I have is, where does the rent for the headquarters or main office, where does that roll into?
That rolls into our administrative threshold that we're allowed to spend. Yeah, so it is in the previous section.
And
I think
that's
for me,
go ahead.
but actually you kind of took me through these numbers already, but
Yes. Yep. So if there are no questions on center costs, I can take you to,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Dan.
Dan's got a question.
Yeah, so just in terms of what we think about the amount of rent we're paying compared to the fair market value, because you could be locked into a good lease or locked into a bad lease, and where are we on those costs?
Our costs are pretty lean for the current market. A couple of things we're looking at. Ashley has information that in the future we're going to have to claim on our financials anything we're going to extend. So Carter and I met with CBRE, and thank you for that, Carter. Josh gave us some good information. He said, I don't think we're ever going to utilize an extension clause because everything has changed in the marketplace. So much is now we're being confronted with conversations about triple net, which I haven't touched in 2 decades because it's too unstable for us. We're on a fixed budget. So we're under market in every scenario. I think the closest we come is the new international district kind of popped us a little bit. That was expensive. It was on the cusp. Anything we've got to do from here on inside Dallas is going to really be important to look at in terms of how it affects the budget, particularly our main office, since it is part of that 10%. But I think there's some really good options down the road. Carter, anything else on that topic? I mean,
Well, Dan, I would say if you look at these cost per square foot rates, they're insane. They're insanely low, and that's an area where we'll be vulnerable if they turn over. The corporate office or the headquarters or whatever we call it, Ross Tower, is going to become very expensive, and it's going to require a hard look at it and testing the market. So that one is probably the most vulnerable. It's the most expensive, or will become the most expensive, and require some work on where we go and what that looks like. And we can brief the board on that, in the February meeting if we need to.
and we weren't there to begin with. I mean, we've been at Hall Street, we've been at other downtown location for a long time, and this has only been a 10-year lease. We're in the 8th year. Ash, we have two years left on Ross Tower.
Yes.
Ross Tower is doing big things and moving things. The chamber just renegotiated their list. So we could keep our relationship with the chamber. We don't necessarily have to house in the same elevator bank. I think there's a lot to be looked at. Central Business District has been good for us, just seeing us as a part of that internal system, and we're here for the employers. I would hate to lose that cachet, but the most expensive buildings in town, probably not a good look for us.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It's very timely.
As an aside, Lori mentioned the what I was looking into for the leases, and just so you know, our financial statements for FY22 are going to look a little different. If you haven't heard, there's new accounting guidance, and it takes effect for our fiscal year 2022. We have to include all of our leases on our balance sheet, which we did not have to do under our old guidance. So that will be coming. And you'll see a large jump because it won't be there for last year, but that's where the change came in, just a rule change.
But it's really been a good conversation, Ash. It's given us a lot more, I think, to look at in terms of how that affects the agency long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Always something to think about. All right, well, this is the last page I have to present to you. This is our annual budget of all of our $183 million, and where does it come from? So most of this, of course, is from TWC. These are each one of our grants that we are expecting or have already received for the current year. The first 5 grants on this page, which now looks even smaller than the other pages, so let me blow it up a little bit more. These first 5 grants are all childcare grants, so you can see that makes up most of our funding. It comes in at 76% of total funds for this year. We do have some non-TWC grants on the page, so we're still spending out some of our Walmart money, and then we recently received a grant from Google. But as I mentioned, most of this is just coming straight from TWC, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about grants or any of the budget that we've gone over this morning.
Now, Ashley, we do have a contingency in each of these grants. You've kept back a little money in case something wonderful comes to our attention, something we could do, but we do have to obligate more of it at the February meeting. There are carryover funds now at year end that we've looked at that need to go out, FIFO stuff from the prior years. No money lost in that. Child care was a threat this week or last week. God, what week is it? That the state is thinking of resizing child care, but I think I've gotten them to commit to me they're not removing any of our money. But they don't see a problem in this. And we went through this last year of, oh my gosh, the money went back. They are right-sizing and right-sizing and right-sizing. They don't know what to do with all this money. And I hate to say that on the record, but they really don't. I think,
Yeah,
Dan,
actually, do you mind putting that back into 125 or something so I can see the whole screen?
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Great.
I better.
Dan,
And roughly, what is the flux? There's roughly $30 million decrease. What would you say makes up most of that?
Yeah, so last year we received such an influx for the service industry grant, and then TWC went to right size that later. So a lot of that 30,000 was taken back out.
Million.
30 million was taken back out of the service industry grant. Now that grant doesn't end until March, so we have some carryover on this page. And right now we're only showing 902,000 remaining for that grant that ends March 31st. But TWC did state that if we needed to, we could go back and request additional funds. It's just been this fine tuning of they weren't sure how much to give, and then they weren't sure how much to take back. So we do anticipate needing to request a few additional funds to close out through March 31st.
so we ended up spending more than we anticipated, but not nearly what was in that grant. I mean, if you remember, we kicked this one around all last year. This is the service industry that was just thrown out to the boards. San Antonio's having the same conversation. Why would we get that much money and not spend it? Because it wasn't spendable. But then again, we've done best we could. The core money is the critical issue. That CCF money is very critical. That if we get that money, we need to fill it out. So We're too efficient, Child Care Group and ourselves. We don't blow a lot of money like some boards do, and we don't have the highest rates for childcare because we can't pay over market. We can't pay more than is published rate, and boy, that's hurting us. So there's a bill right now floating around Austin saying, why don't we pay more? Why don't we use public money to sustain these vendors? I have a problem with that. If it is the published rate of that center and we start paying more than the published rate, where's the integrity in that conversation? That's just strange. But those are the kinds of things, because there's so much money. There is need. There's still need. We have about 2,200 left on the wait list. The wait list keeps fluxing. People come in, people go out. We've reduced it dramatically from what it was in September, but the problem will be that state will want to cap us at 110% of our target. We cannot fulfill the money. So we'll be probably told not to spend out the whole amount or spend some of it in quality. We can spend more than the quality money if we have projects and ideas. I think that's why we're going to have a countywide discussion about resources. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Actually, I think I answered my question, but I'm not sure what it is. If I look at child care service industry recovery, it had a $22 million or $49 million or $50 million start, and then there's a $38 million adjustment. What is that?
That is the money that the state took back out of the grant to right size it and redisperse among other grants during the year.
Okay, so therefore, if I compare the first column to our 23 grant budget, is really only about a $3 million difference.
Yes.
Okay, I answer my question. Thank you.
And part of that was TANF. I think we lost a little money in TANF because of just the numbers. Where else might we look, Ash? We didn't lose it in WIOA, or did we? Just a little bit of money maybe in dislocated worker.
We gained money in all those areas.
Okay. Anything else to point to? Because something has to make up 3 million. Oh, we haven't received all of our funding yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we just got another one on ES. We'll look into it, Carter, and have that before the meeting just to make sure we can answer that question.
We have these little hodgepodge grants, and you can see how much each grant decreased. Here's your net $4 million. So we have things like there's this Workforce Commission Initiatives grant. It decreased to almost $300,000. And I can tell you that really is a hodgepodge grant. They kind of throw whatever in that grant instead of giving them their own grants. They gave us a special couple $100,000 in cybersecurity last year, and it was a one-time thing. So it's a bunch of little things that make that up. Our Walmart grant, Retail Pays, that project has ended, so it's not a new influx of money coming in this year.
It's been an interesting, COVID has been interesting. Too much special money, too much money being thrown at the problems with time limits to spend it. I'm thankful that we didn't get more than this. I'm also thankful that the feds are going to continue to push money into childcare, both sides. I don't think it's a DNR problem. I think it's a DNR agreement. If our kids aren't cared for, we have no workforce. And if our kids aren't cared for and educated, we start them off way behind in kindergarten. So, Ashley, what else we have?
I have made it through the entire budget, so I'm here for questions I can try to answer or investigate.
And this committee cannot take action on a virtual. You can agree that Harry presents this. Will the auditors be with us on the 15th?
No, well, I could ask, but they don't generally come to the February board meeting to discuss their audit plan. They probably could if we wanted them to. They usually come to the August board meeting to discuss the results.
Harry, are you comfortable presenting?
Yes.
The audit plan, and then Ashley can assist on the budget plan.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And then, Ashley, I know that we talked a little bit about sort of freshening up our presentation style going forward for this year. And I've got some thoughts on that I'll share with you offline.
Awesome. Sounds
Okay.
fantastic. I can stop.
Yes. And I mean, just from a general flow standpoint, Harry, thank you for that. I would tell you that any way that we can become more efficient in presenting the numbers and quicker, the better. So
Yeah, like in most things, the certain numbers matter a lot more than others. I don't want to cut out anyone else's curiosity, but I think we can get a pretty good sense of what is actually provoking conversation and what is just passing along like a nothing. Let's jump to the things that people care about.
One thing, I'm not married to the packet. I've changed packets multiple times.
Yeah, I know no one is. So it's and Ashley's been like eager to do it. So we'll figure it out.
I think what I'm concerned about, last year, something took hold, and I want to make sure we don't go there again. This is a workforce board. It just so happens that we're lucky to have a say in childcare funding and childcare expenses. But we did not discuss workforce last year for most of our meetings. And that is the crux of what's, I think, concerning me now as we prepare the strategic plan. It's all data driven. It has less input from the board than I wish it had. So we're going to try to flip the script and get back to more conversation about our employers. Childcare is going to be there. It's a very important, and it's the biggest expenditure, but it's also the least likely to accept board input, except in the quality arena. And that's where we concentrate. That's only $3.8 million. I got to get us back on track. How are we training people? The whole conversation about these career schools, community colleges roll with us. So that's just my plea. Help me bring us back to the strategic discussion about what we're doing for the workforce. It was tough in COVID. So it was very good that we talked about childcare. But now we're back to where are we going to find the workers? And we're quite short in the Dallas market on good workers. Carter, that's just my.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more that we spend a whole lot of time on childcare. In fact, the rumor on the street is that that's what we are as a childcare board. And that couldn't be any furthest from the truth. But, it kind of, last Friday, you sent out a plan that you're presenting to the judge and the mayor, but I've never seen that. So my question is, do we not engage in some way on the board? Is it something that we missed? Where did that come from? And yeah,
you see it every 2 years. You actually helped 2 years ago with it, if you remember. It's a polished plan, looks like this. It was red, white, and black. We use it in the orientation materials. It is so minuscule. It's a representation of data after conversation. So it is data driven by Richard. He pulls together all that last 2 pages. We put on that front screen of what are the innovative activities we are doing now. Where the board should intersect is, are we wrong? Are we wrong? And that's why it's important that the industry board members talk about their industry. And Bill has been very good about this with me, particularly construction. We're going to do more with Local 100. I've got a big meeting with TI next week, week after next, on the semiconductor. We are talking about the chip manufacturing, what the workforce needs to be. It's our board, Tarrant, North Central, and Texoma. So it's the whole 75 corridor. So we're getting a lot of input, but I need the board more engaged in that conversation. I think we had a lot of new people come in from the mayor, and we went straight into the big money, which was childcare, but that's passed through. And I want them to understand that this pays for the care and feeding of children so parents can work. It's a pass-through conversation, except for this amount of money. And if you look at workforce, there's millions going into training and upskilling the workforce. So, but this one, it's every 2 years, and that's why nobody notices it, but it's kind of a marketing piece if you think about it, because we've turned it into a polished, and that's what you got in the board packet Friday. That's what I was trying, or the update Friday.
Yeah, I guess my point is that we have to drive the discussion, and I'm all ears on how to do that. But I don't think that it was noticed. I don't know if you got any input from anybody since Friday. But I think that's something that we have to work towards, is how we communicate that better and get more involvement into But again, if we don't have the right people on the board, we're not going to have input. Like you said, Bill's great in the construction industry, but Pepsi's at the table. But we have other, Jacobs is at the table. So
TI.
and well, are they engaged?
Well, I think it's at Bessie's job. She has connected me with people there, but
Good.
not the right people. But her job is not in that HR. And TI is very compartmentalized, I've learned. Highly compartmentalized.
Well, that's another whole conversation. But yeah, I agree with your comment on reducing the lens of childcare and focusing more on workforce.
And we don't have healthcare on the board anymore, and we desperately need healthcare on the board. I mentioned that to Tristan at the mayor's office. We really need one of the big hospitals back on the board. We had carried Baylor for a long time. We are still looking at the biggest shortage being RNs. Another shortage is teachers. And we're not really having that conversation. And there's a lot to talk about. We put a lot of notes together. I mean, we're still working on planning because we got to get this right. That's a small investment in the scheme of things, but it's the only investment we have is to train some people to do these jobs. So that I'll make a bigger point of it. I truly will, Carter, and explain this is draft. It said draft on it. We are giving
right.
the
I
data
understand.
scrub. And that's what we have to do now is ask the commission. The commissioners aren't going to make much. They really aren't. John's going to talk to me. John Wiley and Price and I have a great relationship, but he's going to talk to me about what are you doing in my district and what about the kids? And, what about diversity, inclusion, and equity? It becomes that conversation. So everybody has a cause celeb. And we've got to figure out, I need a few more people on the board who want to talk about their industry and why their industry is struggling or how to do better. Maybe Bill can lead that off. That would be a good idea. Maybe that he can talk about it many years on the board. And now he's realizing, wait a minute, that's a disconnect. The union down in Houston is doing this. Why aren't we doing this with our apprenticeship program? And that's where this started 2 years ago.
Yeah, we need to use our board meetings in a more active way to draw out this incredible set of talent, diversity we have. And we'll do it. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And nothing is ever set in stone, guys. We write a 2-year plan every week with the government. Whatever you'd like us to do, we can
we adjust, we adapt.
Absolutely.
So is this meeting finished?
Yes, sir. You may conclude the meeting.
Hit the gavel. All right, we're done. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
y'all for your time.
Bye.
Appreciate
See you
you.
later.